The galaxy was dying. Ancient civilizations fell in hours, their crystal cities stripped to dust. Then Ambassador Zai sent a desperate plea into the void. If there is any mercy left in this universe, please help us. The only answer came from the one species everyone feared: humanity. What happened next redefined salvation. The Devourers emerged from the galactic rim like a silent plague. They drifted through the void without energy signatures or communication patterns. Their approach bypassed early warning systems designed to detect hostile intent. They consumed worlds and stars, leaving only waste in their wake. Their method of consumption was methodical and terrifyingly efficient. Planetary surfaces were stripped layer by layer, atmosphere and crust converted into raw material. Stars dimmed as their plasma streams were siphoned into unknown processes. The residue left behind resembled cosmic graveyards, expanses of inert matter and cold rock. Ancient powers like the Keepers and Builders fell within hours. Their advanced technology proved useless against this new threat. The Keepers' energy shields were absorbed and turned into containment fields against them. The Builders' automated defenses were repurposed into attack drones. Both civilizations had survived millennia of conflict only to collapse in a single rotation. Their crystal cities and ring worlds were stripped down to raw biomass. The architectural marvels that had defined galactic civilization became fuel. Towering spires of quantum lattice crystal were broken down into molecular components. Orbital habitats that had housed billions were processed like scrap metal. Nothing was preserved. Not art, not history, not culture. Conventional weapons proved completely ineffective against the swarm. Energy beams were absorbed and redirected back at their sources. Projectile weapons were caught and incorporated into the Devourer's own structures. Even antimatter charges failed when the swarm learned to contain the explosions within adaptive shielding. Each attack only made the enemy stronger. Every defensive measure was absorbed and repurposed against the defenders. The galactic fleets watched in horror as their own technology turned against them. Shield generators became containment fields trapping friendly ships. Communication arrays broadcast confusion and misinformation to allied forces. The very tools of protection became instruments of destruction. The galaxy's military doctrines were based on honor and rules of engagement. Wars were fought with declared intentions and negotiated surrenders. Combat followed accepted protocols about acceptable targets and weapon limitations. Prisoners were treated according to interstellar conventions. These traditions had maintained stability across countless conflicts. These rules became fatal weaknesses against a perfect predator. The Devourers recognized no conventions and offered no negotiations. They exploited every limitation their opponents imposed upon themselves. Honor became a vulnerability. Mercy became a tactical error. Civilized warfare had no answer for an enemy that followed no rules. The Devourers were designed to counter standard galactic warfare, making them seemingly invincible. Their biological systems adapted to energy weapons after minimal exposure. Their command structure decentralized to prevent decapitation strikes. They evolved countermeasures faster than tactics could be developed. This perfection against conventional methods created an unstoppable force. This collapse created the conditions for Ambassador Zai's desperate broadcast. With civilizations falling by the hour and no military solution in sight, diplomacy gave way to despair. The plea represented not just a call for help, but the acknowledgement that existing solutions had failed completely. The stage was set for something beyond conventional salvation. Ambassador Zai stood before the fractured remains of the Galactic Council. The chamber felt hollow, with empty seats stretching in every direction. Only 7 delegates remained where hundreds had once negotiated peace treaties and trade agreements. Their faces showed the strain of continuous retreat. The air recycling systems hummed with a strained note, filtering out the distant particulate matter from destroyed worlds. Their species was among the last standing against the Devourer advance. They had held the line through tactical genius and sacrifice. Their home system's defenses had been reinforced with technology traded from fallen civilizations. This final strongpoint represented the last coordinated resistance in the sector. Every other system had either fallen silent or broadcast termination signals before going dark. Traditional diplomacy had failed. All civilized solutions were exhausted. Peace envoys sent to the Devourers never returned. Surrender offers received no acknowledgement. Even attempts at communication using mathematical constants and universal symbols yielded no response. The enemy operated outside all known frameworks for interaction. They were pure consumption without negotiation. The transmission equipment was ancient but functional. It had been maintained for ceremonial purposes rather than practical use. The console's interface glowed with soft light as Zai adjusted the frequency settings. The system was tuned to broad-spectrum frequencies that could penetrate nebulas and gravitational anomalies. Its design prioritized range over precision, casting the widest possible net across the cosmos. Zai's message contained specific biometric markers of desperation. His vocal patterns showed elevated stress indicators and cortisol level fluctuations. Pupil dilation and cardiac rhythms were encoded in subcarrier waves. These biological signatures couldn't be faked or replicated by automated systems. They represented genuine physiological distress at the cellular level. This tone pattern would later be recognized by human psychological analysts. They would identify the specific combination of vocal tremors and respiratory patterns. Human conflict history had created databases of genuine distress signals from disaster zones and war theaters. The markers matched profiles of populations facing certain extinction. It was a pattern they had learned to trust. The plea was sent on multiple bands, hoping to reach any potential ally. Emergency channels, scientific frequencies, and even military bands carried the same message. Each transmission drained power from the station's failing reactors. The signal repeated every 17 seconds, a rhythmic pulse of desperation moving at light speed. It was a gamble with no certainty of reception. Most species considered it a final act of despair rather than hope. The few remaining civilizations monitoring the frequencies marked it as a termination notice. They began updating their records to reflect another lost system. No defense fleets mobilized. No rescue operations launched. The message was received, logged, and categorized as a tragedy already completed. The message became the radioactive seed that would summon humanity's response. Its unique signature stood out against background cosmic noise. The desperation markers triggered deep response patterns in human psychological evaluation systems. What others dismissed as a death rattle, humans recognized as a call to action. It traveled through dead systems toward the one region everyone avoided. The signal passed through nebulas where civilizations had been extinguished. It crossed battlefields silent except for drifting wreckage. Its path took it directly toward human-patrolled space, the one sector other species viewed with unease. The transmission moved relentlessly toward the listeners who wouldn't ignore it. Captain Jake Morrison's colony ship drifted through the quiet expanse near the Orion Spur. The New Horizons routine patrol covered a sector known for its stellar stability and minimal traffic. Scans showed nothing but background radiation and the slow drift of ionized gas. The crew monitored comms for standard traffic and navigational warnings. It was the kind of shift that bred familiarity, not alertness. The New Horizons sensors detected an anomalous transmission pattern. It wasn't on any recognized diplomatic or scientific band. The signal pulsed with rhythmic inconsistency, breaking conventional formatting rules. Its carrier wave showed signs of heavy degradation, as if it had traveled through turbulent space. The AI flagged it for human review due to its irregular structure. The signal contained biometric markers of extreme distress and hopelessness. Voice analysis revealed elevated heart rate patterns embedded in subfrequencies. Stress hormones and neural activity signatures were woven into the modulation. This wasn't a composed message. It was a raw physiological broadcast, the kind that can't be staged or falsified. The sender was not just afraid, they were experiencing systemic collapse. Humanity had heard similar tones during their own planetary famines and civil conflicts. Audio archives from Earth's dark periods held matching vocal tremors and respiratory patterns. These were the sounds of populations facing extermination events. The specific combination of panic and resignation triggered deep recognition protocols. Human neural networks had been trained on these patterns for disaster response. Dr. Amy Foster identified the pattern as a genuine cry for help, not a trap. Her team ran comparative analysis against known deception tactics and false distress calls. The biometric markers aligned perfectly with verified crisis transmissions from human history. There were no signs of strategic exaggeration or hidden coding. The emotion was too consistent, too biologically coherent to be manufactured. Earth's leadership received the decoded message within hours. The transmission bypassed normal diplomatic channels due to its urgency classification. Military and scientific advisors assembled in secure briefing rooms. The message's content was stark, a plea for intervention from a civilization facing annihilation. The translation software highlighted the speaker's deteriorating mental state. They recognized the sender as a species that had previously condemned human methods. Historical records showed this civilization had voted to restrict human expansion decades earlier. They had advocated for disarmament treaties and non-aggression protocols. Their diplomats had once called humanity reckless and dangerously innovative. Now they were begging for help. The irony of receiving a plea from those who called them monsters was not lost on command. Strategic officers noted the historical context during the initial assessment. The species now facing extinction had been among the most vocal critics of human military philosophy. Their downfall came from adhering to the very principles they had enforced on others. Humanity faced a grim calculus. Ignoring the plea would mean allowing a civilization to die. Responding meant embracing methods that violated galactic norms. The decision required weighing moral responsibility against strategic consequences. There were no good options, only varying degrees of compromise. The decision would require mobilizing weapons everyone else considered taboo. Human arsenal included systems banned by interstellar agreement. These were tools designed for maximum efficiency, not ethical warfare. Deploying them would confirm every negative assumption other species held. But they might be the only things that could work against this new threat. Admiral Ron Blake stood before Earth's Strategic Command Council. The room felt heavy with the weight of impossible decisions. Screens displayed casualty reports and system loss updates in relentless streams. Every officer present knew they were witnessing the final hours of galactic civilization unless something changed radically. The briefing presented a simple, horrifying reality. The galaxy was dying faster than anyone had predicted. Entire sectors had gone silent in the past rotation. The Devourer advance showed no signs of slowing or diversion. Their consumption patterns indicated they would reach human space within months. The math was clear and unforgiving. Every civilized species had failed using honorable methods. The records showed defeat after defeat following the same pattern. Fleets adhered to engagement protocols and weapon restrictions. Commanders offered surrender terms that were never acknowledged. Each civilization fought with the restraint their laws demanded. Their honor became their epitaph. Dr. Foster's assessment suggested humanity's unconventional approach might work. Her analysis compared Devourer adaptation patterns with human military history. She noted how previous conflicts had been won by breaking established rules. Her data indicated that predictable warfare would fail against this enemy. Only asymmetric thinking stood a chance. She identified a chilling paradox in the Devourer's design. Their perfect adaptation to civilized warfare created a critical blind spot. They were engineered to counter sophisticated technology and strategic nuance. Their systems responded to complex threats with elegant solutions. But they had no framework for processing pure, unrestrained violence. They were perfect predators against civilized warfare, but vulnerable to raw violence. Their adaptive networks couldn't process attacks that lacked tactical sophistication. Overwhelming force applied without strategy confused their response mechanisms. They expected calculated moves from rational opponents, not brute force from desperate ones. The ethical dilemma weighed heavily on every leader in the room. They knew the weapons humanity would need to deploy. These were systems designed for maximum destruction with minimal discrimination. Using them would violate every interstellar agreement about armed conflict. The moral cost would be immense and permanent. Choosing to help meant embracing methods that violated interstellar treaties. Humanity would need to weaponize physics in ways other species considered monstrous. They would deploy systems that targeted biological processes rather than military assets. The very tools that made other civilizations fear them would become their primary instruments. The survival imperative outweighed precedent. The Council recognized that extinction justified extreme measures. Traditional ethics couldn't apply when facing total annihilation. The rules written for conflicts between living civilizations didn't cover fights against existential threats. Sometimes breaking the rules became the only way to preserve anything at all. Humanity would mobilize its full arsenal without restrictions or limitations. Ships would be loaded with weapons that had never been tested in combat. Research facilities would activate projects that had been shelved for ethical concerns. The entire military-industrial complex would shift to maximum production. They would become the monsters the galaxy feared to save it. This transformation would happen consciously and deliberately. Every officer in the room understood the consequences of this decision. They were choosing to embody the very nightmares other species had projected onto them. Salvation would require accepting that monstrous reputation as a tactical advantage. Chief Engineer Sam Parker oversaw the retrofitting of 67 ships. The work proceeded in orbital dry docks that hadn't seen this level of activity in decades. His teams worked around the clock, cutting into hulls and rerouting power conduits. Each vessel required structural modifications to handle new weapon systems never intended for standard deployment. The scale of the operation demanded precision under extreme time pressure. The human fleet needed weapons that broke every galactic convention. Standard armaments had proven useless against the Devourer threat. Parker's engineers pulled schematics from restricted archives and experimental labs. They weren't just upgrading firepower, they were re-engineering the very concept of space warfare. Every system violated principles other civilizations considered fundamental to ethical combat. These were systems banned by treaties humanity never signed. The Galactic Convention on Warfare had established clear limits on permissible weapons. Humanity had declined to ratify those agreements, maintaining strategic flexibility. Now they were activating every system others had outlawed. Parker's teams worked with tools that had been mothballed for ethical reasons rather than technical limitations. Nuclear warheads capable of sterilizing continents were loaded into launch bays. These weren't tactical devices for precision strikes. They were strategic weapons designed for maximum area denial and environmental destruction. Each warhead carried yield adjustments that could turn a planet's atmosphere into plasma. The launch sequences required command authorization from multiple senior officers. Biological agents designed for extreme virulence were secured in containment. These weren't weapons that targeted military installations. They attacked biological systems at the genetic level, rewriting cellular reproduction. The containment protocols involved triple-locked systems with independent verification. A single breach could create an unstoppable pandemic in any oxygen-based ecosystem. Kinetic systems that could crack planetary crusts were calibrated for precision strikes. These weren't projectile weapons for ship-to-ship combat. They were planet killers that could trigger tectonic shifts and volcanic events. Targeting computers calculated impact points that would maximize geological instability. The energy requirements drained power from other essential systems during activation. Each weapon represented a line civilized species refused to cross. The galaxy had established clear boundaries about acceptable force. These systems existed in the gray space beyond those limits. Parker watched as his teams installed devices that other engineers would have dismantled on moral grounds. The work felt like dismantling centuries of ethical progress. The crews knew they might become war criminals in the eyes of those they saved. Training sessions included legal briefings about interstellar law. Every officer understood the potential consequences of using these systems. They accepted that victory might mean standing trial before galactic courts. This knowledge created a grim determination rather than hesitation. Humanity intended to win by forcing the Devourers to confront unrestrained violence. Their strategy rejected measured response and proportional force. They would attack with overwhelming brutality from the first engagement. The goal was to overwhelm adaptive systems with sheer destructive power. This approach denied the enemy any opportunity to learn or counter. This armada would test whether brutal pragmatism could defeat perfect adaptation. The ships represented a philosophical argument made manifest through weaponry. They would demonstrate whether civilization could be saved through uncivilized means. Every system loaded and calibrated represented a bet against conventional wisdom. The fleet would either become saviors or confirm every fear about humanity's nature. Dr. Carol Stone examined biological samples recovered from early encounters. Her lab on Mars Colony displayed containment units holding fragments of devourer tissue. The specimens moved slightly even in stasis, showing residual cellular activity. She observed them through reinforced transparent aluminum, noting the unusual energy signatures. Each sample represented a piece of the puzzle that had defeated entire civilizations. The Devourer's biology complicated every assumption about warfare. Their cellular structure defied standard classification systems. They incorporated inorganic materials into their biological matrix seamlessly. Energy weapons left temporary damage that repaired within minutes. Projectile weapons were absorbed and repurposed as structural reinforcement. Nothing in military doctrine prepared anyone for this level of adaptation. They were not a single static foe, but a continually evolving swarm. Their form changed based on environmental conditions and threats encountered. What worked against one segment became useless against others minutes later. They learned collectively and implemented improvements across all units simultaneously. This constant evolution made traditional intelligence gathering nearly impossible. Their core strategy involved absorbing and repurposing weapon effects into new defenses. Energy blasts were converted into shield capacity. Kinetic impacts strengthened structural integrity. Even radiation was processed into nutrient sources. Each attack made them stronger and more resistant to that specific type of assault. They turned opposition into advantage through rapid biological computation. They assimilated organic matter, planetary materials, and even nanotech into their warfighting apparatus. Crustal elements became armored plating, atmospheric gases fueled metabolic processes, captured technology was broken down and incorporated at the molecular level. Nothing was wasted. Everything became part of their expanding biological network. This efficiency made them nearly impossible to starve or deprive of resources. Traces of DNA from dozens of different species were found in their biology. Genetic markers indicated assimilation rather than natural evolution. The patterns suggested deliberate collection and incorporation of useful traits. Some sequences matched species thought completely extinct for millennia. Others showed modifications beyond natural evolutionary pathways. This suggested a designer origin, a weaponized mosaic built to outpace any standard doctrine. The biological complexity indicated artificial enhancement rather than natural development. The incorporation of multiple species traits pointed to intentional engineering. This wasn't evolution, it was biological weapons development on a galactic scale. Someone or something had built the perfect predator. Their adaptation network shared improvements across the entire swarm in real time. When one unit developed resistance to a weapon, all others gained that protection immediately. The communication happened through quantum-entangled biological signaling. Distance didn't matter. Improvements spread faster than light across the swarm. This made localized tactical victories meaningless against the overall threat. The human plan became a test of strategic flexibility against perfect biological warfare. Standard military thinking would continue to fail against this enemy. Only completely unconventional approaches stood any chance of success. This required abandoning centuries of tactical doctrine and established rules of engagement. The situation demanded radical thinking without limits or restrictions. Victory would require breaking rules no civilized species would consider. Ethical boundaries would need to be treated as tactical suggestions rather than absolutes. Weapons previously considered too dangerous or immoral would become necessary tools. The very concept of acceptable losses would need radical redefinition. Success would come at the cost of principles other civilizations held sacred. General Pete Collins faced the Devourer fleet in the Vega system. 73 ships stood against a swarm that numbered in the thousands. The tactical display showed red markers spreading like blood in water. Collins watched his officers working their stations with grim focus. They knew the numbers didn't favor survival. This was humanity's first major engagement against the swarm. Every previous encounter had been small skirmishes with scout elements. This was the main force, the central organism that had consumed civilizations. The veteran crews had trained for difficult battles, but nothing like this scale. They were about to test their new weapons against the real threat. The odds were overwhelmingly against human forces. The Devourer swarm outnumbered them 30-1. Their biological constructs dwarfed even the largest human battleships. Sensor readings showed energy signatures beyond anything previously recorded. The tactical computers calculated survival probabilities that were statistically zero. Devourer adaptive armor proved initially formidable against conventional attacks. The first laser volleys were absorbed without visible effect. Missile impacts left temporary dents that smoothed over within seconds. Railgun projectiles embedded in the biological material and were assimilated. Standard weapons that had worked against other species achieved nothing here. Their bioconstructs repaired damage almost instantly. Gaps torn by explosions filled with new growth. Severed tentacles regenerated within minutes. Even direct hits to central masses showed only temporary effect. The enemy adapted its cellular structure to resist each new attack type. It learned faster than weapons could be retargeted. Collins recognized that standard tactics would lead to certain defeat. His training emphasized flanking maneuvers and strategic withdrawal, but this enemy didn't respond to feints or diversions. It simply absorbed losses and adapted. Traditional space combat doctrine had been developed against thinking opponents, not this organic machine. He committed to a direct assault with no chance of survival. Collins ordered every ship to target the largest bioconstruct simultaneously. He bypassed normal tactical protocols and authorization chains. The command required accepting 90% casualty rates within the first engagement minute. It was a decision no civilized military would normally consider. His heavy wave crashed into the fortified bioconstructs. Ships accelerated to maximum velocity without evasive patterns. They fired every weapon continuously without conserving ammunition. The approach vector ignored standard defensive postures. It was a battering ram strategy. Pure force applied directly against the strongest point. Nuclear warheads detonated against the biological armor. The explosions created temporary breaches in the adaptive shielding. Kinetic impactors followed through the openings before they could regenerate. Bioconstructs that had resisted careful targeting now faced overwhelming simultaneous damage. The coordinated assault created cascading failures across multiple systems. Collins' sacrifice allowed nuclear and kinetic weapons to penetrate swarm defenses. His ships absorbed the initial defensive response while delivering their payloads. The concentrated firepower overwhelmed local adaptation capabilities. For the first time, Devourer biological matter failed to regenerate properly. The breach proved their systems had capacity limits. This breakthrough proved humanity's methods could work where others failed. Civilized warfare had failed because it attacked systematically and selectively. Humanity attacked with everything simultaneously without restraint. The Vega engagement demonstrated that overwhelming force could temporarily overwhelm adaptation. It wasn't elegant or precise, but it worked. Dr. Foster studied the data from the Vega engagement. The sensor logs showed patterns that didn't match any known biological system. Every weapon impact created adaptive responses that spread faster than light. She identified quantum-entangled communication nodes throughout the swarm. Their coordination defied conventional understanding of biological limitations. The Devourer's coordinated network was their greatest strength. It allowed instantaneous sharing of tactical information across light years. Damage taken by one unit became knowledge for all others immediately. This created a collective intelligence that learned faster than any individual entity. Their unity made them more than the sum of their parts. It was also their critical vulnerability. The very connection that made them powerful created a single point of failure. Any weakness in the network could potentially affect the entire swarm. The system that provided their strength also made them interdependent. What helped one helped all, but what harmed one could harm all. The swarm's collective adaptation worked by sharing improvements through a biological network. Specialized cells acted as data nodes and transmission points. They communicated through quantum entanglement rather than conventional signals. This allowed instant updates regardless of distance or interference. The network operated like a living internet with real-time updates. When one biochip learned to resist a particular attack, all others gained that immunity. The adaptation process happened at the quantum biological level. Resistance patterns were encoded and broadcast simultaneously to every unit. There was no delay between discovery and implementation. The entire swarm evolved together as a single organism. This systemic linkage operated like a distributed learning machine. Each bioconstruct contributed to the collective knowledge base. The network processed information faster than any computer system. It could analyze threats and develop counters in milliseconds. This constant evolution made static warfare strategies useless. Any weakness exploited in one unit would be patched across the entire swarm. Temporary advantages disappeared almost immediately after discovery. Tactical breakthroughs became obsolete within minutes of implementation. The enemy learned from every engagement faster than tactics could be adjusted. This created an arms race that conventional forces couldn't win. Traditional warfare couldn't outpace this rapid evolution. Military doctrine relied on sequential learning and gradual improvement. The Devourers evolved exponentially with each encounter. Standard command structures moved too slowly against this threat. Civilized warfare was fundamentally unequipped for this challenge. Foster realized the network itself could be turned against them. The strength that made them invincible could become their downfall. If the adaptation mechanism could be compromised, it would affect the entire swarm simultaneously. A single successful attack on the network could have galaxy-wide impact. This insight changed the strategic equation completely. She began designing a virus to attack their adaptation mechanism. The weapon would target the quantum communication nodes specifically. It needed to mimic normal network traffic to avoid detection. Once inside, it would corrupt the adaptation algorithms from within. The virus would turn their greatest strength into their ultimate weakness. Foster's lab on Luna Station became the center of desperate innovation. The sterile white chambers hummed with computational arrays running complex simulations. Teams worked in rotating shifts, analyzing biological data from Vega system encounters. Every finding was cross-referenced against known xenobiological databases. The atmosphere felt thick with concentration and mounting pressure. The virus needed to exploit the very mechanism that made devourers powerful. It couldn't be a conventional biological weapon targeting standard life processes. Instead, it had to attack the quantum-entangled communication network itself. The design required understanding how biological systems could maintain faster-than-light information transfer. This meant reverse engineering principles beyond current human science. It had to cause their adaptation system to malfunction catastrophically. The virus couldn't simply disable the network. That would leave individual units still functional. It needed to corrupt the learning algorithms so they would generate fatal errors. The goal was to make the adaptive process turn against the host organisms. Perfection would become poison. The design required near-contact deployment for maximum effectiveness. Broadcast methods would be filtered out by biological security systems. The virus needed direct injection into a primary network node. This meant delivering it physically to a central bioconstruct during active combat. The insertion vessel would have to survive point defense systems and adaptive countermeasures. It would need to bypass multiple layers of biological security. Devourer systems had evolved to detect and neutralize foreign biological agents. The virus had to mimic normal network communication patterns perfectly. It required encryption that matched their quantum biological signaling. Any deviation from expected traffic would trigger immediate immune responses. The virus would turn unity against itself, triggering self-destruction across the swarm. Instead of sharing defensive adaptations, it would spread corrupted code. The network would begin transmitting lethal biological commands. Units would receive instructions to dismantle their own cellular structures. Collective intelligence would become collective suicide. This approach violated numerous ethical guidelines about biological warfare. Every major human civilization had banned self-replicating bioweapons. The potential for mutation and uncontrolled spread made them universally condemned. Using such a weapon meant abandoning principles established after terrible plagues. It crossed lines that had remained uncrossed for centuries. The potential for misuse made everyone involved uneasy. This technology could be turned against any biological civilization. Once deployed, the knowledge of its existence could never be erased. Other species would rightly see it as an existential threat. The creators were giving humanity the ultimate weapon against all life. Foster's virus promised galaxy-wide leverage to turn the tide. A successful deployment could neutralize the devourer threat within hours. It offered a solution that didn't require fleet engagements or massive casualties. The strategic advantage was undeniable, if they could make it work. But the cost to their ethical standing would be permanent. It represented the ultimate expression of humanity's brutal ingenuity. This was weaponized science without moral constraints. The virus demonstrated how far human innovation could go when survival was the only priority. It was both their greatest achievement and their deepest compromise. They had created salvation that looked indistinguishable from damnation. Admiral Blake orchestrated a galaxy-spanning assault. His command center monitored fleet movements across 12 star systems simultaneously. Officers coordinated timing through quantum-entangled communication networks. Every ship captain received identical countdown sequences. The operation required absolute precision across unimaginable distances. The invasion threat neutralized as the swarm consumed itself. The advance that had threatened entire star systems halted abruptly. Devourer forces stopped moving toward new targets. Their attention turned completely inward toward self-annihilation. The pressure on surviving civilizations eased within hours of the virus taking effect. Human forces watched as their enemy unraveled from within. Sensor arrays showed the chaotic breakdown spreading exponentially. Ships held position at safe distances, monitoring the collapse. Military analysts recorded the unprecedented biological failure. They witnessed the end of a threat that had seemed unstoppable days earlier. The scale of destruction was both horrifying and relieving. The violence of the self-destruction exceeded any external attack. Bioconstructs tore themselves apart with terrifying efficiency. The same adaptive capabilities that made them formidable now magnified their downfall. Observers felt simultaneous revulsion and profound relief at the spectacle. The immediate threat to countless civilizations ended. Systems that had been moments from consumption were suddenly safe. Evacuation orders were rescinded across multiple sectors. The relentless pressure that had defined the galactic situation vanished. Breathing room returned to species that had faced certain extinction. The galaxy was saved through biological warfare turned inward. Humanity had used the enemy's greatest strength as the instrument of defeat. The victory came not from superior force but from strategic subversion. The method would forever alter how civilizations viewed conflict and salvation. The price of survival would be measured in ethical compromises rather than military casualties. Humanity surveyed the aftermath of their campaign. Ships drifted through empty systems where battles had raged hours before. The silence felt heavier than any explosion. Recovery teams moved through debris fields that stretched for thousands of kilometers. They collected what remained of ships and crews. The scale of destruction defied comprehension. The fleet was reduced to fragments across multiple systems. Only 19 vessels remained fully operational from the original 67. Most survivors showed battle damage that would require months in dry dock. Some hulls were so compromised they couldn't risk FTL travel. The cost and material resources would take decades to replace. Crew losses approached 8,000 confirmed deaths. That number didn't include those still listed as missing in action. Memorial services began simultaneously across human colonies. The casualty rate exceeded worst-case projections from pre-war exercises. Each name represented years of training and experience lost forever. Ships' engines were strained beyond safe operation parameters. Engineering teams found stress fractures in containment fields. Power cores showed radiation leakage from emergency overloads. Some vessels would never fly again despite appearing intact. The fleet had been pushed past design limits to achieve victory. The psychological toll on survivors would last generations. Combat stress reactions appeared even among veteran crews. Nightmares featured biological horrors and lost comrades. Some officers developed refusal syndromes when ordered back to duty. The trauma would echo through families and communities for years. They had saved civilizations that once reviled them. The same species that had condemned human methods now owed their survival to those methods. Rescue operations began extracting populations from endangered systems. Human ships appeared where they had been banned for decades. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. The methods used would forever stain humanity's reputation. Biological warfare violated every interstellar agreement. The virus represented a weapon others would rightly fear. Human soldiers would carry the mark of war criminals in some jurisdictions. Their victory came at the cost of moral standing. Ethical boundaries had been crossed for practical results. Commanders had authorized weapons that targeted biological processes. They had sacrificed ships and crews as tactical distractions. The calculus of acceptable losses had been brutally applied. These decisions would be debated for centuries. The staggering price paid neutralized the devourer threat. The swarm's collapse was total and irreversible. No significant biological traces remained active. The galactic community could begin rebuilding without that shadow. The immediate danger had been eliminated completely. Humanity proved willing to bear extreme cost to protect others. They had sacrificed their own without hesitation. Their willingness to become monsters had saved civilizations that feared them. This demonstrated a commitment to galactic survival that went beyond rhetoric. Actions had spoken where words would have failed. Alien leaders expressed their thanks to humanity. Formal communications arrived through diplomatic channels that had been silent for decades. Each message followed proper interstellar protocol with careful wording. The gestures felt both genuine and strangely formal, like apologies delivered through clenched teeth. Representatives appeared on view screens with carefully neutral expressions. They spoke the words of gratitude while their body language showed tension. The galaxy recognized Earth's intervention saved countless lives. Reconstruction efforts began across dozens of star systems. Evacuated populations returned to worlds that should have been consumed. Children who would have died now played in streets that still stood intact. The scale of the salvation was beyond calculation. Billions of beings owed their continued existence to human actions. This reality couldn't be ignored or minimized. This gratitude came mixed with deep-seated fear. The thank you messages included subtle reservations and conditional phrasing. Celebrations of victory carried undertones of unease. Species that had been saved now looked at their saviors with new apprehension. The relief of survival was tempered by uncertainty about future implications. No one forgot how the victory had been achieved. The methods humanity used violated long-standing galactic norms. Biological weapons had been outlawed for centuries across most civilizations. The virus represented everything interstellar treaties sought to prevent. Its deployment crossed lines that species had agreed never to cross. Even in victory, the means troubled those who benefited from them. Principles that had governed conflict were now compromised. Their capacity for devastating violence was now fully demonstrated. The unprecedented scale. Other species saw what humanity could do when constraints were removed. This demonstration changed power calculations across the galaxy. Fleet's actions showed willingness to use any weapon available. Their tactical decisions accepted catastrophic losses without hesitation. The coordinated assault displayed military precision on N. The image of humans as monsters persisted despite their heroism. Old prejudices found new fuel in recent events. The very actions that saved lives also reinforced negative stereotypes. Some species saw saviors, others saw dangerous unpredictability. The monster label stuck because it now came with proof of capability. Reputations proved harder to change than military situations. Civilizations felt uneasy relying on such unpredictable saviors. Their security now depended on a species that broke all the rules. This created strategic vulnerability they had never anticipated. Defense planning had to account for human intervention as both possibility and threat. The stability they knew had been replaced by uncertainty. Comfortable assumptions about galactic order were gone. The victory validated humanity's willingness to act beyond convention. They had demonstrated that rules were optional when survival was at stake. This approach had worked where civilized methods failed completely. Their success justified their philosophy of practical solutions over principled ones. The galaxy had to accept that sometimes rules needed breaking. The galaxy learned to rely on those they once reviled. Emergency protocols now included human response options. Defense strategies incorporated capabilities only humanity possessed. The outsiders had become essential to security planning. This dependence created uncomfortable but necessary partnerships. Old prejudices gave way to practical necessities. Salvation came from the last place anyone expected. The species deemed too dangerous to trust had become the only hope. The monsters of galactic imagination had turned into guardians. This reversal challenged fundamental beliefs about civilization and barbarism. The universe had delivered its answer from the quarter least anticipated, rewriting the story of what it meant to be both savior and threat. Dr. Foster's virus research became a classified asset. The laboratory on Luna Station was stripped of all related data and equipment. Every sample, every simulation, every research note was secured under military guard. Access required clearance levels beyond most fleet admirals. The knowledge was compartmentalized across secure facilities light years apart. No single person retained complete understanding of the weapon they had created. The Vengeance would carry Foster's virus for close-range injection. The modified frigate had been stripped of all offensive capabilities. Its entire payload capacity was dedicated to the viral containment system. Specialized shielding protected the biological weapon from detection. The ship's crew trained for a single mission profile: approach and deliver. Their survival wasn't factored into tactical calculations. The rest of the fleet had to create a synchronized distraction across multiple systems. 63 capital ships would engage Devourer forces simultaneously. Their objective was to draw attention away from the Vengeance's approach. Each engagement needed to appear as a genuine assault rather than diversion. The attacks required enough force to demand the swarm's full attention. Every weapon in human arsenals would be launched simultaneously. Nuclear warheads, kinetic impactors, and energy weapons would fire in coordinated volleys. The timing needed to overwhelm the Devourer's sensory processing capabilities. If attacks happened sequentially, the swarm could adapt and respond. Only simultaneous massive strikes across multiple fronts could create the necessary diversion. This required precision timing across light years of space. Ships positioned thousands of light years apart needed to act within microsecond synchronization. Quantum clocks provided the coordination framework for the assault. Even light speed delay couldn't affect the planned simultaneity. The mathematics of the operation pushed the limits of human physics understanding. The distraction needed to overwhelm the Devourer's sensory capabilities. Their networks processed information faster than any conventional system. Only maximum weapon output across all frequencies could potentially overload them. The assault would include electromagnetic pulses, gravitational distortions, and particle beam saturation. Nothing could be held in reserve. Every system would fire at maximum capacity. Crews knew casualties would be extreme on all fronts. Survival probabilities were calculated below 15% for most ships. The diversionary attacks would face the swarm's full defensive response. Each captain understood they were essentially flying suicide missions. They accepted this knowing the Vengeance's mission offered the only real chance of victory. The plan balanced tactical execution with acceptable losses. Command had determined the minimum number of ships needed for successful diversion. Additional vessels were considered expendable beyond that threshold. The mathematics of sacrifice had been coldly calculated. Every life lost was weighed against the probability of overall mission success. This coordinated attack would test humanity's capacity for large-scale violence. Never before had so much destructive power been unleashed simultaneously. The energy output would briefly outshine entire star clusters. The assault represented the culmination of human military development. It was violence raised to an art form and science combined. Success depended on perfect execution under impossible conditions. A single mistimed attack could reveal the diversion strategy. Any deviation from the plan would alert the swarm to the real threat. The Vengeance's approach required complete tactical surprise. Everything hinged on every ship performing exactly as scheduled across the vast emptiness of space. The Vengeance approached the Devourer command bioconstruct. The ship moved through defensive perimeters with careful precision. Its engines burned at minimal output to avoid detection. The massive biological structure loomed ahead. Larger than most moons, sensor scans showed complex energy patterns flowing through its surface. This was the most dangerous phase of the operation. Previous attacks had never reached this close to the central node. The bioconstruct's defenses were designed to repel any approach. Every system on the Vengeance operated beyond recommended safety limits. The crew knew they were entering territory no ship had survived. Point defense systems tore through the ship's shields. Bioluminescent projectiles struck with pinpoint accuracy. Shield generators overloaded and failed within seconds. Hull plating vaporized under concentrated energy fire. The ship's structural integrity dropped to critical levels. Warning alarms sounded across all decks simultaneously. Crew members sacrificed themselves to protect the viral payload. Engineers sealed breached compartments with manual overrides. Security teams diverted power from life support to defensive systems. The medical bay transformed into an auxiliary engineering station. Every action prioritized the weapon's survival over personnel safety. They understood the mission mattered more than individual survival. The injection required physical contact with the main biological node. The Vengeance needed to touch the bioconstruct's surface directly. Specialized docking clamps extended from the ship's forward section. The connection mechanism had to penetrate multiple layers of biological armor. This physical link would allow the virus transfer to begin. Devourer adaptive measures attempted to counter the intrusion. Biological defenses recognized the foreign contact immediately. Anti-boarding protocols activated across the contact area. Nanite swarms emerged to dismantle the invading structure. The bioconstruct attempted to isolate and analyze the threat. Its systems worked to understand this new form of attack. The virus bypassed security through its mimicry of normal network traffic. It replicated the quantum-entangled communication patterns perfectly. The biological security systems recognized it as legitimate data transfer. It moved through firewalls and checkpoints without triggering alarms. The deception relied on perfect understanding of Devourer internal communications. Foster's design exploited their own protocols against them. Initial signs showed the biological weapon taking effect. The bioconstruct's energy patterns began fluctuating erratically. Defensive systems started firing at random targets. Coordination between different sections broke down completely. The adaptive network showed signs of cascading failure. The virus was propagating faster than anticipated. The transmission, "Tell them the job is done," marked the mission's success. The signal went out on secure military channels only. It contained verification codes confirming viral deployment. Command centers across human space received the message simultaneously. The simple phrase carried the weight of galactic salvation. Collins's sacrifice in Vega completed the disruption of Central Command. His initial assault had weakened the network's defensive algorithms. The damage patterns from that engagement created vulnerabilities the virus exploited. His fleet's destruction had provided the crucial data needed for this victory. The two battles connected across time and space to achieve what neither could accomplish alone. The virus began propagating through the Devourer network. It spread faster than any conventional biological agent. The quantum-entangled communication channels became its distribution system. What was designed for sharing adaptations now served as the perfect delivery mechanism. The infection moved at the speed of thought across light years of space. Adaptation mechanisms malfunctioned across 3 sectors simultaneously. Bioconstructs that had seamlessly evolved against threats began showing erratic behavior. Their cellular regeneration cycles accelerated beyond sustainable limits. Defense systems activated randomly without external stimuli. The precise coordination that defined the swarm started breaking down at the edges first. The swarm's unity became its downfall. The interconnectedness that provided strength now transmitted failure. The virus corrupted the shared learning algorithms completely. Adaptive responses became self-destructive commands. The network that had ensured survival now guaranteed collapse. Perfection turned against itself in the most fundamental way. Bioconstructs turned against each other in chaotic violence. Units that had operated as a single organism began attacking neighboring structures. Tentacles that once coordinated assaults now ripped apart allied biomass. Energy weapons fired point-blank into previously protected flanks. The swarm consumed its own components in uncontrolled frenzy. Self-destruction protocols activated without external triggers. Cellular division processes reversed into aggressive decomposition. Energy production systems overloaded into catastrophic explosions. Structural integrity collapsed from within as support matrices dissolved. The biological perfection that had made them invincible now accelerated their end. This information could never be allowed to fall into the wrong hands. The security protocols exceeded those for nuclear weapons or strategic plans. Data storage used quantum encryption that would self-destruct if tampered with. Physical samples were kept in facilities protected by automated defense systems. Knowledge of the virus's existence was limited to a handful of trusted officials. Even discussing it required authorization from multiple command levels. The same principles could be turned against other species. The virus's design wasn't specific to devourer biology alone. Its core mechanisms could be adapted to target any biological system. The quantum-entangled delivery method worked across universal biological constants. This made it potentially effective against carbon-based life everywhere. The weapon represented a universal threat rather than a specific solution. Earth scientists hardened safeguards and encrypted all related data. They created multiple layers of deception around the research facilities. Decoy projects were established to mislead any potential investigators. The real work continued in hidden locations with no official records. Data was broken into fragments stored across different systems. Reassembly required codes held by separate command authorities. The knowledge represented ultimate power over biological systems. Whoever controlled this technology could threaten entire civilizations. It offered the ability to neutralize opponents without conventional warfare. The virus could achieve what fleets and armies could not through normal means. This made it more valuable and dangerous than any physical weapon. Its potential applications extended far beyond military use into control and coercion. Its existence threatened galactic stability if misused. The balance of power depended on mutual assured destruction through conventional means. This weapon changed that calculus completely. A single actor could now blackmail multiple species simultaneously. The threat of biological annihilation would override normal diplomatic relations. Trust between civilizations would become impossible to maintain. Humanity now guarded secrets more dangerous than any weapon. Military patrols increased around research facilities that didn't officially exist. Intelligence agencies monitored scientific communities for any leak indicators. The burden of containment fell on special operations teams trained for denial missions. They stood ready to eliminate any potential security breaches with extreme prejudice. The protection detail became a permanent operational requirement. This responsibility weighed heavily on scientific communities. Researchers who had worked on the project faced lifelong monitoring. They couldn't discuss their work even with cleared colleagues. The moral weight of what they had created affected their daily lives. Some requested transfers to unrelated fields to escape the burden. Others accepted their role as perpetual guardians of dangerous knowledge. Foster's creation remained both a salvation and a threat. It had saved the galaxy from certain destruction when nothing else could. But it also introduced a new permanent danger into interstellar relations. The weapon existed as both protector and potential destroyer. Its dual nature reflected humanity's own complicated position in the galactic community. They had become the keepers of their own greatest fear. Its potential for harm matched its capacity for protection. The same mechanisms that could save civilizations could also exterminate them. The virus represented the ultimate expression of this paradox. Humanity now held power that could either preserve life or erase it completely. This balance would define their role in galactic affairs for centuries to come. The knowledge they guarded would shape destinies beyond their own. Admiral Blake addressed the World Council's concerns. The chamber held representatives from every major surviving civilization. Their holographic projections flickered with subtle translation delays. Blake stood at the central podium, his uniform crisp against the somber background. The air carried the weight of unspoken tensions and remembered conflicts. Other species pushed for restrictions on human weapons and tactics. Their proposals filled data slates with detailed limitations. They wanted bans on biological warfare systems and strategic weapons. The document cited interstellar treaties humanity had never signed. The language focused on restoring pre-war norms and protocols. Each clause sought to constrain methods that had proven effective. They wanted humanity to disarm to make others feel more comfortable. The requests emphasized psychological security over practical defense needs. Delegates spoke of nervous populations and cultural anxieties. They argued that visible disarmament would build trust across species. The underlying message was clear. Humanity's capabilities made everyone uneasy. Comfort became more important than capability in their calculus. Blake countered that this would leave the galaxy vulnerable to future threats. He presented intelligence reports on unknown anomalies beyond explored space. His briefing showed how quickly the Devourers had overwhelmed conventional defenses. He reminded them how many civilizations had fallen using restricted methods. The data indicated potential threats they couldn't yet comprehend. Survival required maintaining effective response options. Humanity's stance was a necessary precaution rather than a threat. Blake explained their weapons served as insurance against unknown dangers. He described them as tools of last resort, not first option. Their existence ensured no similar threat could emerge unchallenged. This was about practical security, not aggression or domination. The systems existed to prevent war rather than wage it. Their methods had proven effective where all others failed. Blake displayed battle records from the Devourer War. The footage showed conventional fleets being absorbed and destroyed. Then it showed human weapons creating actual damage. The comparison was stark and undeniable. Civilized warfare had failed completely against this enemy. Only unconventional approaches had worked. The argument hardened the galaxy's view of Earth's monsters. Delegates exchanged uneasy glances during Blake's presentation. Their expressions showed renewed apprehension mixed with reluctant acceptance. They recognized the logic while fearing its implications. Human capabilities remained frightening even when necessary. The monster label gained new substance from this demonstration. They were both indispensable saviors and dangerous anomalies. The Council needed humanity's protection but feared their power. This duality created unresolvable tension in every discussion. Delegates acknowledged their dependence while resisting its consequences. They wanted the security without the uncomfortable reality of its source. The contradiction defined all post-war negotiations. Blake made clear humanity would not disarm itself for others' comfort. His statement carried finality without aggression. He explained that survival couldn't be sacrificed for diplomatic convenience. The weapons would remain active and ready for deployment. This wasn't negotiable or open for discussion. The decision was presented as fact rather than position. This stance redefined post-war power dynamics across the galaxy. Humanity became the unacknowledged guardians of interstellar security. Other species maintained their formal protocols and restrictions, but they secretly relied on human capabilities for actual protection. This created an unofficial hierarchy that everyone recognized but never discussed. The monsters had become the necessary foundation of galactic peace. The war's aftermath revealed a transformed galactic landscape. Stars that had been dark for months now showed new energy signatures. Drifting wreckage fields marked where fleets had died. The silence felt different now. Not the quiet of extinction, but the stillness after a storm. Everything had changed, and nothing would return to what it was before. Depopulated worlds and shattered alliances needed rebuilding. Entire systems required terraforming to restore habitability. Governments that had ruled for millennia were gone without successors. Trade routes lay abandoned between dead stations. The infrastructure of civilization needed reconstruction from the ground up. This wasn't recovery. It was creation of something entirely new. The ethical equilibrium of interstellar relations was disrupted. Protocols that had governed conflict for centuries were now questionable. Weapons restrictions seemed naive against what they had faced. The rules of engagement felt like dangerous limitations. Civilized warfare had proven inadequate against existential threats. This realization changed how species viewed their own security doctrines. Humanity's savage ingenuity had saved the galaxy from true evil. Their unconventional methods had worked where tradition failed. They had applied solutions others considered unthinkable. Their willingness to cross lines became the key to survival. The victory demonstrated that sometimes radical approaches were necessary. Civilization had been preserved through apparently uncivilized means, but the price redefined what it meant to be monstrous. The weapons used and tactics employed created permanent stains. Actions taken for salvation looked indistinguishable from atrocities. The line between hero and villain became dangerously blurred. Methods that saved lives also demonstrated terrifying capabilities. This ambiguity would haunt interstellar relations for generations. Civilizations now relied on a species they once feared. Defense plans incorporated human response capabilities. Emergency protocols included previously forbidden options. The monsters had become essential protectors. This dependence created uncomfortable but necessary partnerships. Security now came from those who had been distrusted. The meaning of heroism expanded to include necessary brutality. Saving lives sometimes required taking them without hesitation. Protection demanded actions that violated moral codes. The clean ideals of honorable combat gave way to messy reality. Heroes were now those who did what worked, not what felt right. This new definition challenged centuries of cultural tradition. Trust became conditional on continued demonstration of restraint. Other species watched human military developments carefully. Every weapons test was analyzed for potential threats. Diplomatic relations included subtle monitoring agreements. Confidence was earned through consistent behavior over time. The burden of proof remained permanently on humanity. Salvation demanded a radical break from accepted norms. The old ways had failed completely against the devourer threat. Only unconventional thinking had provided solutions. This required abandoning principles that seemed fundamental. The crisis justified measures that would normally be unthinkable. Sometimes preserving everything required risking everything. Humanity lived with the consequences of being both savior and terror. They were thanked for their actions while being feared for their capabilities. Their heroism came with permanent suspicion. They had saved civilizations that would always view them cautiously. This dual identity became their new normal in galactic affairs. The price of victory was eternal vigilance from those they protected. Ambassador HFY watched reconstruction efforts from his observation deck. The stars looked different now, not just points of light but markers of survival. His chambers felt both quieter and heavier than before the war. The weight of consequences settled into the polished surfaces around him. Every decision carried echoes of that desperate transmission. The galaxy had called for salvation and received Earth's monsters. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. The species that had been condemned as barbaric became the only effective responders. Those who had advocated for restrictions now relied on unrestricted methods. The plea for help had been answered exactly as needed, not as desired. This reality challenged every assumption about civilization. The protocols and treaties that defined interstellar relations had proven inadequate. Honor and rules had crumbled against pure threat. The foundations of galactic society required re-examination. Everything they believed about security and morality needed reconsideration. The comfortable certainties of peacetime diplomacy were gone forever. Sometimes when facing true evil, only monsters can save you. The Devourers represented something beyond conventional opposition. They operated outside all frameworks of conflict and negotiation. Standard responses became not just ineffective but counterproductive. Extreme threats demanded extreme solutions from unexpected sources. Survival sometimes required embracing what you fear most. The way civilizations remember war must include uncomfortable truths. Victory narratives often emphasize heroism and sacrifice. They rarely acknowledge the moral compromises required. This war would be remembered with mixed feelings across generations. The story would include both gratitude and unease. Honest history would preserve the full complexity of what happened. Humanity's intervention prevented total annihilation. Their actions saved billions of lives across dozens of species. Worlds that would be dust now showed signs of recovery. Children who would never have been born now played in rebuilt cities. The scale of preservation defied easy calculation. This objective fact remained undeniable despite methodological concerns, but their methods would forever color interstellar relations. The biological weapons and unrestricted tactics left permanent marks. Trust would always be conditional on continued restraint. Every human military development would be watched with apprehension. The salvation came with permanent psychological consequences. The rescued would always remember how they were saved. The galaxy rebuilt with Earth's help, relying on those once reviled. Reconstruction teams included human engineers and scientists. Security patrols involved joint operations with human vessels. The outsiders became essential partners in recovery efforts. Cooperation became necessary despite lingering discomfort. Practical needs overcame historical prejudices. The moral center remained unsettled by what victory required. Philosophers debated the ethical implications for decades. Military academies revised their curricula with new case studies. The line between necessary and unacceptable became dangerously blurred. This ambiguity would influence galactic policy for centuries. Certainty gave way to difficult questions without easy answers. Salvation came at the price of redefining monstrous power. The weapons that saved lives also demonstrated terrifying capabilities. The protectors remained potentially dangerous to those they protected. This duality became embedded in the new galactic order. Safety and threat now came from the same source. The universe had revealed its complicated truth about power and protection. The galaxy learned that salvation often wears frightening faces. Humanity's victory proved that against perfect evil, imperfect methods succeed. The fallen civilizations rebuilt their cities, but minds remained scarred. Survivors lived with the memory of monstrous saviors. The line between protector and threat had blurred beyond recognition. Those rescued would never forget the cost of their survival. Earth's forces maintained their watch from the shadows, weapons still ready but restrained. Remember that sometimes the monsters are what stand between us and extinction. This truth lingers in the quiet between stars, uncomfortable, undeniable, and eternal.